my clock says it is 7:30, and therefore it is time to say a very warm welcome to this second Haven webinar. So good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining, and you are here, bang, right on time. So well done for that. My name is Claire Banham, if we haven't met before, and I am the founder of the Haven. And I will let my colleague introduce himself as well.
I'm Jez, and I've been involved in Haven for a couple of years, particularly delivering the course in the local secondary schools. So I've picked up plenty of tips and tricks on the way, but also quite excited for how this can apply to so many people's lives. So yeah, that's my involvement.
Cool. And I thought we might give a kind of interesting fact about ourselves this evening. My interesting fact is that I've been a youth worker for many, many years now, and I started my youth work career in Uruguay, in Latin America, and that was in the year 2001.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had a little think about that as well, and realised that I started my youth work career in the primary school playgrounds when I was about 8. We ran a little club called the Games Club, and it didn't really occur to me at the time that this was a little flash forward of how life might be years and years on, but some of the ideas, inspirations sort of started around that age. And it wasn't until more recently, when I was looking back, that I was like, wow, okay, yeah, something was going on then. So that's how I started.
Right. We are going to now, go over to the PowerPoints, which I'm going to start running through so that we can look at our topic this evening. There we go. So this evening, what we're hoping to do is go through look at the mental effects.
Just before you do that, have you closed the poll results?
I think so.
Okay, if you clicked it off, that's fine. Yeah.
Great. So here's what we're hoping to go through this evening. Mental anxiety. So what's going on in our heads? How is that causing and affecting our anxiety? So is there ways that which our thinking process is affected by stress, but also is there something about the way we think that is actually causing us anxiety? We're going to share some, oh gosh, that's really difficult to get my mouth around this evening, share some top tips, and we've got some practical strategies to introduce you to this evening, which we hope you'll find really useful, and we'll be signposting you to other resources as well. So thinking and anxiety. What is the relationship between what's going on inside our heads and our anxiety levels? So I'm sure a lot of you will have covered in biology and in science what is going on at a kind of a neurological level when we think. And it really comes down to these amazing electrical impulses, the neuron pathways that kind of light up different parts of our brain in order that our brain can then send messages throughout our body, so getting us to do all the things we need to do in order to respond to situations and to do all the automatic functioning stuff as well. So neuron pathways are amazing things. I get very excited when I get to see the diagrams of the brains and kind of what's actually happening and how it all works, and I love this picture, which is that sense that actually there's so much going on. The connectivity of our brain is immense. So that's the really good side. Now, kind of slightly, well, the challenge, I suppose, is that we can very easily get into habitual thinking. So when we form new pathways in our brain, the ones that we use a lot get kind of more and more traffic through them and get more and more clearly defined. And it's a bit like this picture of a field with a path running through it. And you know exactly where all the dog walkers have been, don't you? And the dog walkers always go the same way because the path has been laid by one or two, and then somebody sees, oh, look, there's a path. That's the easiest way to go. And so they start going as well. And before you know it, you've got this really clearly defined pathway running through the field. Well, our brains and our minds are a bit like that. And so when we think a certain way and we think it a lot, it's a very clearly defined pathway in our brains. And that is, well, it's a challenge, because if we want to think in a different way, we have to come up with some creative solutions to help our mind kind of break away from those established pathways. And that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. Some of those kind of bad habit thinking that we get into, and actually how we can break that habit.
It's interesting, isn't it, looking at this pathway, because actually if you've ever tried to go off that pathway in a field, it's quite hard work to get through, and you would need sort of some help and some idea of where you're going with it in order to make it actually work for you. So yeah, just highlights that setting a new path is a challenge, but it can get you where you need to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to be looking at that tonight, and I wondered how you think anxiety affects your thinking. So we're going to be going through some bad habit thinking. We're going to be going through some bad habit thinking, and here's some of those thinking traps that we all tend to fall into. Now, we fall into different ones, and the good thing to point out is it's not just people who are anxious or struggle with anxiety that fall into these traps. Everybody falls into thinking traps at some point along the way, but we're going to be looking at those. But it will be really interesting as we go along. If you want to say, oh yeah, that's something that I do, and this is the way that it works for me, so give some examples, or just share with us what effect you think being anxious has on the way you think. So do give us your input and your ideas as we go along, because we don't want this just to be about us, we want it to be about you too. So let's have a look at some of these in more detail.
Just say that again, make sure everyone got that. So it's how does the way you think affect your anxiety?
Yeah. So how does when you get anxious or stressed, how do you feel that affects the way that you're thinking? And also, as we go along and we look at each specific one, it would be good to know if that kind of rings bells for you, and if you can think of an example that you might sort of use in that way. That'll become a bit clearer as we go along. Right, let's have a look. So the first one is all or nothing thinking, which is also known as black and white thinking. So do you know people, or does this ring a bell with you, that actually it's all one way or completely the other? Doesn't seem to be many shades of grey. There doesn't seem to be much middle ground. It's all either absolutely brilliant or a complete disaster. So that is what's happening with the thinking trap of all or nothing. And the trouble with that is that actually life is often about a kind of subtle bit in the middle. And so if we kind of throw our thinking and we listen to our thinking that says that's it, one thing's gone wrong, the whole thing's a disaster, then we can write off what actually is still 85% a good thing. So somebody might think, for the example I've got is, I've eaten a piece of cake and now my entire diet is ruined, I might as well give up. Whereas actually, if you just kind of go, oh yeah, made a mistake there, but I can get it back on track, you haven't thrown it all out in that moment. So I wonder if that rings a bell with you. Please do think about that, and whether you can think of examples that you've seen in either in your thinking or in other people's thinking. Jumping to conclusions. Now, I think this is a bit of a favourite of mine, to be honest, and it comes into sort of two main categories that this thinking trap kind of is shown through. First of all is mind reading. Now, this is definitely me, guilty as charged, that I look at somebody else, I see a reaction, and I assume that I can work out what they're thinking. and I kind of jump to a conclusion and fill in a gap that I don't really know, and often in a way that paints me, or that I can feel hard done by, or I will assume the worst, perhaps. So, for example, I might see somebody. I'm doing a presentation, and I see somebody yawn, and I might think, "Oh my goodness, they think I'm so boring. This is a rubbish presentation." When actually they've been up all night and they're really knackered. So, can you see how actually we can fill in the gaps and make it all about us, when actually it doesn't necessarily need to be at all about us? And the other way that this can work out is fortune telling, acting as if the worst case scenario is guaranteed to happen when we really don't know what's going to be around the corner, do we? And by assuming the worst, we've sort of painted ourselves into that anxiety and stress when we really don't need to. The future is yet to happen. Okay. And I love this one. This one is one of my favourites. Well, not because I like the actual thinking trap, but because I love the word. So it's catastrophization, also known as magnification. So this is where we just convince ourselves that the worst possible outcome is just guaranteed. And we also kind of get swept along by it and assume that we couldn't possibly cope with what's going to happen. So we blow things out of proportion, and we assume that there's no way that we're going to be able to cope with this. So you might think, oh, that thing has gone, a little bit wrong. So this is the worst ever, and I'm going to fail. So I know of somebody who was taking their driving test, and they didn't let somebody out. They were driving, and they saw somebody waiting to come out, and they didn't let them out because they couldn't think about whether they should or not. So they thought, I won't. And then as they were going past, they thought, oh, I should have done that. Now I've guaranteed to fail. And they'd written themselves into a position of failure by a tiny thing that actually was fine anyway. So, but it's that mindset that we get ourselves into really, really easily. So I wonder what you would think that might work, how that might work for you. Have we got anything on the chat, Jez, to share yet?
We've got somebody commenting, I think in response to your question earlier, that their sort of anxiety feelings cause them to feel overwhelmed. That's the word that they posted up there.
Yeah.
So, the sort of, it's
yeah,
is really, isn't it? You can't make sense of it when you feel overwhelmed. It's very, very difficult. You need a strategy or an idea or some help getting out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll come on to that. Okay, so we've just got another couple of thinking traps to go through before you guys can work out which one you think that you fall into the most. So I will whiz back through them so that you can be reminded. So we have emotional reasoning. I like this one. I think it's really interesting. This is when we listen to our feelings, which is a good thing. But because we feel a certain way, we assume that the world around us is kind of shaped by that feeling. So we take what we're feeling and we then kind of impose fact on stuff around us that we don't really know. So, for example, and I think this is really interesting. So, because I feel embarrassed, therefore I must be an idiot or stupid. And I feel nervous, so something bad must be about to happen. Or I feel lonely, which means that I have no friends or that I'm not likable. So the feelings are driving the way that we think the world is, rather than noticing our feelings and just accepting them as just being feelings. And our last one, I think, is perfectionism. Perfectionism, I think, is a killer. And it's where you hold yourself to this unobtainably high standard that you probably wouldn't expect of anybody else. And if you even, can't, because you can't possibly make that perfect standard, then you beat yourself up, because it's, in your eyes, you've let yourself down and you're just hopeless and it's never going to work. So be setting yourself this ridiculously high standard and then beating yourself up if you make a small mistake or you just can't live up to your own expectations. And that's a really crushing thinking trap, I think. It's a real crusher. So those are the 5. Let's just run through them. So we've got all or nothing thinking, jumping to conclusions, catastrophizing, emotional reasoning, and perfectionism.
Okay, well, there's a great comment that's popped up on the chat, kind of again in response to that idea of what's it like when your anxiety takes over, or what starts to happen. And the comment is that we are more likely to notice the small details rather than the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. And as a result, this can have an effect on our brains and we think negatively.
Yeah, that's really true, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah, so we zoom in, don't we? It's a bit like when you look at the mirror and you only see the tiny little flaw or whatever, and that's the bit you zero in on. You don't see the rest. It's just that little bit that you don't like, and that kind of pain, like that means that your whole attitude is just zeroing in on the bit you don't like and you miss the rest. Yeah. And we've got another comment. I fall into emotional reasoning a lot, especially when I'm already anxious. But perfectionism is my worst, though. And if I can't do my absolute best, I get in the mindset that it's not worth it. Yeah, I think sometimes we aim so high and we feel like that, but we forget that good enough is actually quite a lot of the time. A good enough is good enough, and we don't need to be operating at 100% the whole time, because if we did, we'd burn out. We're not designed to be operating at that high level all the time. Now, most people have voted, so I'm going to end the polling and share the results. So, wow, look at that. Perfectionism is way in the lead. So 6 people voted for perfectionism. Really, really interesting, with a very high.
Something that's very telling, really, isn't it? Yeah, thank you for that.
And I wonder if that's also because actually, as people who are anxious, that's one of those sort of things that actually we know we're prone to being anxious, and that perfectionism is partly what's driving our anxiety. Right. Great. Thank you very much for that. So we are going to look at something that we can use to help us in terms of those thinking traps, because as I said earlier, thinking traps is something that pretty much everybody on the planet will fall into at one point or another. It's those bad habit thinking that we get into, and that we can get into a very early age, actually, and then we start to just reinforce it because we only accept the things that kind of tick or match with that bad habit thinking. But there are ways that we can stop it, and the good news is, I go back to our PowerPoint. The good news is, we've missed my gift, Ez. A nice little gift there that I'd lined up especially.
On my screen.
Okay, so the good news is that actually, with thinking traps, a lot of the battle is won by spotting it. When we notice what is happening in our thinking, we take a lot of the power away. when we notice what is happening in our thinking, we take a lot of the power away, because so much of the time we just get swept away with our thoughts, don't we? And that, you know, that age-old saying, I think, therefore I am. But actually, thinking is part of who we are, but it doesn't need to define the way that we feel, and it doesn't need to define the way we act. So by noticing what we're thinking and going, that is a thinking trap, that is bad habit thinking, we are sort of distancing ourselves from the thought and not allowing it to run away with us, but actually we're kind of putting the brakes on. So that is really, really good news. And then once we've got into the habit, another habit, the good habit of spotting the thinking trap, then we can start to ask a really, really important central question. And that is it a fact or is it just an opinion? Is it a fact or is it just opinion? Now, if it's a fact so I can smell smoke. I can't. Don't panic. No one panic. I can't smell smoke. But I can smell smoke. And then, so I start to race. My mind starts to race. Something's on fire. Something's on fire. The house is burning down. Panic levels. Panic, 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 panic. Can you see what's happened there? I've smelt something. I've got a reaction to something that's going on in the world around me. I filled in the gaps. And I decided that I'm going to react not to the smoke, but to my assumption of what the smoke means. So actually it's a bonfire and it's outside. It's all fine. So I'm questioning, I can smell the smoke. The bomb, everything's on fire. Hold on. Is that a fact? No, it's not a fact. The fact is I can smell the smoke. So, and my opinion is everything's burning down, we're all going to die. But actually, by stopping and noticing that I was leaping, I was filling the gap, I was catastrophizing, it's all going to end in disaster. I can stop and go, okay, what's the fact? The fact is there's smoke. That was my opinion, that we're all on fire. Okay, now I can do a bit of an investigation. Okay, we're fine. Does that, I hope that helps to work out that this question is key. So Jez, because this question is so important, we've got a little trick that we can use to kind of reinforce it, don't we? Do you want to take us through that?
Okay, so this is where the science comes into play, and hopefully I'll be able to explain it. So if you think back to the field picture that Claire showed earlier, you had a pathway going through the middle of a field with lots of crops. That pathway is the easy one to follow. So to continue with one of your thinking traps, to kind of let that take over and rule you, would in a way be the easy option. What you want to do is go off that and you're building a new track with a positive message. Okay, so what you've done is you've identified that you're thinking a thought trap or a thinking trap, and now you want to do something physical to help your mind to interject in that process. Okay, so there are lots of things you could do physically to kind of give yourself a little not quite a jump, but but what we recommend is that you do something like you grip one of your thumbs really firmly. Okay, now we're not trying to squeeze the blood out of it. It's almost like a comforting thing in a way. You're just holding your thumb really firmly. It doesn't matter that it's specifically your thumb. This is about sending your brain a new physical message. Okay, and so what you're now going to do is take that thinking trap, and if you've realised that it was an opinion, but you need a fact, then what you're going to do is tell yourself something that's true in place of the opinion that you'd been going by. So it might be, if if you're perfectionist and it's that kind of thinking while you're gripping your thumb, you might want to say, I'm only human, but I'm going to give this my best shot. Okay, so it's about being positive, it's about being kind to yourself, and it is about being realistic as well, because sometimes you put quite a heavy weight on yourself trying to be perfect, and actually it's about just saying, I'm going to do the best I can do in this situation. Okay, so it might be that you need to sit and think through when you get a thinking trap, write it down. I would encourage you to do it. Like, I forget, I move on with my day, and sometimes my thoughts just go on. But if you become aware of one, write it down, because you can deal with it maybe a bit later, and you could do the thumb thing straight away, or you could do it maybe if you need to move on at that time. And also, it's quite nice because maybe a week later you can come back to that thinking trap and you can be like, how am I doing with this now? If you've been working on it, if you've been, telling yourself some good truths to replace it, then you might find that a week later you are doing better, and it's just encouraging to see that. Okay.
Yeah. And even if you can't actually come up with a positive sort of statement that's antidote to your thinking trap, then the thumb thing still works just by spotting it, just by spotting what you're thinking, the trap that you're falling into, and then think, is it a fact or is it just opinion? Even that on its own will actually be really powerful. And we sort of suggest the thumb because you can do it really easily, and you could even do it without using your other hand, so no one needs to know what you're doing. So that's really why we do it with the thumb. We've had a really good question on the Q&A that I wanted to come to. Somebody's asked, can you have perfectionism without beating yourself up? They've said, like, for example, making sure that everything you do is always perfect, like in artwork. I guess my question is art meant to be 100% perfect? Because if it is 100% perfect, then it's not necessarily human. We are human beings, and human beings are gloriously flawed. And when we expect ourselves to be perfect, we will end up beating ourselves up. So I think you can aim for the highest possible standards, but you need to be realistic and kind. So being realistic and kind. So I'm not saying lower your standards, but I'm saying check in with yourself. Are you actually aiming for something that is achievable, or are you always going to come up short, in which case that is not a healthy thing? And actually, what would it look like to be kind to yourself as well as have high standards? Because I think there's nothing wrong. Sorry. There's nothing wrong with having high standards, but you do need to be kind to yourself at the same time. Right. That's a brilliant question, though. Please do come back in with some more questions as well. So I'm going to come back to those other questions in a bit, because right now what I'd love us to do is to kind of ask for your top tips. So as much as possible in the Haven, we use the Haven as a platform for people who do struggle with anxiety to help one another, and that means you guys are the experts. So we would love to know what has been working for you in these last few weeks. How have you been tackling and managing your anxiety levels and helping them to reduce? What strategies you've been using? What top tips can you share? So please pop those in the chat box. We would love to see what you have been doing whilst in this last few weeks to really help make a difference in your own anxiety levels. Great. Now, I wanted to come back to a comment we had about thinking and what the difference it makes when they're stressed or anxious. So somebody said that their thoughts become exaggerated, and they tend to think the worst possible outcome is definitely going to happen. Can you hear the thinking trap as we talk about it? It's interesting, isn't it? Someone said that some of their thoughts get messy and confusing. It feels like they're a battleground, preventing the panic attacks. So isn't that interesting? There's sort of almost like two sides going on. But that's really interesting, because already your mind is trying to protect yourself, that there is a battle going on. It's not just swooping straight to the panic attack, but is in fact kind of trying to fight back, which is a really good thing, isn't it? So please do keep telling us your ideas about what it is that the effect that stress and anxiety has on your thinking, but also what have you found that is helping recently? What have you found that you're doing that just helps even a little bit? We'd love to be able to share those top tips. Somebody has shared last night they had a pretty bad anxiety attack. I mean, sad to hear that, and nobody was able to help because I guess it was at night, and so they listened to a Stephen Fry audiobook, which was just enough of a distraction to allow me to get to sleep. Oh, Stephen Fry's voice, that alone would make things feel better, wouldn't it? But that's a great idea. Audiobooks I find really, really helpful. And again, if I'm awake at night, I try to listen to something that I already know the plot of, though, because otherwise I find it too exciting and I get distracted. Right, just kind of check in with the Q&A. Reading a book or listening to really upbeat music to distract myself. So distraction, we talked about that last week, didn't we? That actually distraction is a really good thing, because we want to get the power of our of the sort of energy in our brains. We want it to going back into the rational, logical part, our prefrontal cortex, and away from our limbic system, which is the kind of fight, flight, freeze reflex. And to do that, we want to distract ourselves. So distraction techniques are really good. And someone else has said getting out of the house and off screens. Yeah, you know, actually, if we can get outside, have a bit of exercise, and actually get up and just allow your body to kind of relax, physically relax, and that will help your mind to just calm down. Right, I'm going to come back to the key questions in a while, but thank you very much for that. Those comments are really, really helpful. And hopefully next week you'll also be able to bring along some other suggestions, because we want this to be a really good place where people can share top tips. Right, how are we doing? So we're going to look at a really important way that we can get our brains, our minds, working for us. And that is how we can get our minds help us be kind to ourselves. Now, I use this phrase, and I've already used it this evening, and I know it's a bit of a cliche, and I know it's a bit of an overused phrase, but I think it is a little bit key. If we can't be kind to ourselves, then, you know, we are going to get into all sorts of difficulties in our mind. So it's so important. And actually, one of the ways that we can practically be kind to ourselves is notice our inner voice, and not notice it, but actually change it a little, maybe. So when I say your inner voice, I'm not talking about hearing voices. That is a symptom of mental illness. It's and actually, do you know what? 1 in 10 people in the United Kingdom at some stage will hear some kind of auditory hallucination, so hearing voices. And so it's not something to necessarily be scared about, but it is something to maybe talk to somebody about, or do some research about if that's happening to you, and that you can hear things in your head that you don't think are really there. But I'm not talking about that tonight. At the end, I'll come back and I'll put some information in up that will give you some helplines if that help sheets if you think that is something that you struggle with. But for now, we're talking about the tone of voice, the character of our thoughts. How is it that we talk to ourselves when we think to ourselves? What's the sort of tone of voice that is in our thoughts? So it can be a little bit tricky to spot, because actually we're so used to thinking of our thoughts as being us that trying to divide the two can be a little bit tricky. So I've got an exercise. So what I would love it for us all to do now is if we can make ourselves as comfortable as possible wherever we are, and we're going to do a visualization technique. So the first thing to do is just take a nice steady breath. Let's breathe in through our nose and out through our mouths. And again, in through our noses and out through our mouths. And now I want you to just hold up one of your hands. I'm holding up my left hand. So on that hand, hand number 1, I want you to imagine, you might find it easier to close your eyes. I want you to imagine the character of your inner voice. So build almost like a little avatar or a little character kind of animation of who is that inner voice for you, the tone of your inner voice. You might want, if a character doesn't speak to mind, it might be a symbol or a picture. Something that sort of says, that's the tone of voice that I have in my thoughts. That's the character of my inner voice. Now our minds are very clever. Mostly our primary objective of our mind is to protect ourselves, it's to protect us and keep us safe. So even if the character you have sitting on that hand doesn't look very nice, maybe they do, that's great. But if they don't, there's probably a reason that they've chosen to be like that in order to protect you. I wonder what they would say was their reason for being the way they are. You could ask them. But if your inner voice is not kind and motivating and encouraging, then that's what we need. So now I want you to lift your other hand. And in hand number 2, I want you to draw a new character or imagine a new avatar or little symbol, something that represents motivating and encouraging, like a really good positive coach. Your inner voice being the tone that you need to be the very best, but in a kind and motivating and encouraging way. So I wonder what the difference is between the two. So actually, what we can do is thank the original inner voice, the one on number 1, but actually say it's time for them to have a rest. It's time for them to take a back seat. So thank them for their work, but say it's time for them to rest and lay them down and let them go. And now it's time for hand number 2, the character of your encouraging, motivating, coaching inner voice to have full reign, so that your inner voice is what you need to be kind to yourself. That doesn't necessarily mean being soft, and it doesn't necessarily mean letting yourself off all the hooks, because as somebody just said about their artwork, actually we need to be able to strive and we need to have goals. But a coach will encourage you and motivate you and cheer you on and spur you to do your best. But they'll also be kind. And that's what we want for your inner voice. So we say thank you to that one. They're in control. Okay. Now, if you haven't done a visualization technique like that before, it might feel a bit odd. But it can be very powerful. And just as we were saying before with the thinking traps, noticing is half the battle. Noticing is half the battle. So when you find yourself thinking in a way that resonates more with the first character, if that is not kind and if that is not encouraging and motivating, You just say, thank you. No, that's not what I need. And you can then just sort of almost call the other one back in, if you like. Being kind to ourselves starts with what's going on in our heads. And we have the power to do something about it and not just be swept along. And that, I guess, is probably the sort of heart of what we're sharing this evening. Now, how are we doing time-wise? Very good. We're doing very well. That's excellent.
Yep.
Very exciting. Great. So, Jez, you were going to tell us about what other what we can do on our YouTube channel. So if I bring up our YouTube channel.
Yes, if you can screen share that.
Yep.
Hopefully you were with us last week. You might have had a chance to check out the YouTube channel. We love subscribes and we love likes, so please do acknowledge anything, and especially if you found a particular video helpful, more people will be drawn to it. So
this is how you find us. If you haven't found us yet, the Haven, Haven, what do we say? Mental buoyancy, which is a weird word. How do you spell buoyancy? It would help if I could spell it.
Make sure
and if you do that, there we go.
Brilliant. So there's a number of videos on here. There's techniques for helping you to some of these mental awareness activities. We've got breathing on there. We've got scanning our body and our senses, soothing our minds. So these are just different things to try. All of them require you to take a little bit of time and have a go at them, and you may find some of them more helpful than others. You'll also find last week's webinar up there, so if you missed our week one, please do go and watch that again after this, because we discussed some really helpful beginnings, didn't we, about the sort of mental effects of anxiety. And then we've got a couple of sort of deep relaxation and sleep techniques on there, but we're going to be focusing more on sleep in next week's webinar.
Excellent. Very good. Now, I did promise that we would put a couple of things up. So I'm just looking at if I can find those at the moment. We've got a couple of really good, I've got a couple of really good things I'd love to share. I'm just looking for where I saved them, so I'll come back to that in a bit. Sorry, I can't find those at the moment. I tell you what, we've got a link to the full list of thinking traps, and we've also got that link to the organisation that has got some really good information about if you're hearing voices. So I will make sure those go up in our YouTube info with this video, so that you can get hold of those links there. Where else can you find us? You can find us on Instagram. Now, I'm going to get this right this week. It is at Haven Resilience. There we go. Not a hashtag in sight. So it's at Haven Resilience is our Instagram. So you can follow us there, and that will give you all sorts of top tips as we go along as well. Right, we have quickly got time to have a look at the question and answers as well, the Q&A section, see what other, if you've got any other questions, please stick them up and see how we go. Can we still be anxious about something that went into our brain months ago, but it's still there? We don't know why we're feeling so anxious, but it's something in the back of the brain and haven't thought about it for a while. Oh, I think that's probably a resounding yes. It's really interesting, isn't it, what we get anxious about? And it can be that it's something that it's just our minds are. It's like having, I think it's like having a kind of a jumbled bit of wool in our brain, sometimes our thoughts. And when we're anxious about something and we feel like it hasn't been resolved, it's like we haven't quite kind of found the end of it. We're trying to constantly find that, where is that, or unpick it. And even if we're not sort of doing that consciously, I think that can sometimes just be affecting our anxiety levels. So if we
Can
think...
I just sort of comment on that as well, Claire?
Yeah, please do, Jess.
I can remember as a child watching a fairly scary movie for the age I was, and literally I could not go to sleep in a room on my own for about 3 months afterwards. So, you know, I often... My brother and I shared a routine at bedtime. One of us would have to, well, we'd chat and stay up and chat. One of us would go in my parents' room for a while, and then we'd come back in the same room. And I remember I would keep myself awake until my brother was in the other bunk bed, because I was scared. It just fed on it. So I think, yeah, absolutely, those things. And yeah, it's worth working through them if you can find somebody to talk to about it.
I think that is key. Finding somebody who you can talk to, even if you think it's just a notion that might be something that's still affecting your anxiety levels. It's really worth talking through. And if you can't talk to anybody about it, then you could try journaling, writing about it, or doing something creative, giving yourself a way to kind of work through it. I think would be really worthwhile. So that's if you've got even an inkling of what it might be, then I would go back and explore that either with somebody else or in a journal, or do something creative if you're that way. Now, is there anything else? We had another suggestion of a really good top tip. They said that they find their mum, and the mum tells them really bad jokes, like really bad jokes that are so bad that they laugh, and that way they're distracted, or they phone a friend, and that's a really good distraction as well. Yeah, people are a great distraction, aren't they? Often for some of us, actually, if we've been spending a bit too much time in our own heads, we need to get out of them. We need to spend time with other people, and that is a really good way for us to just bring those anxiety levels down. Great. Any more? I'm just going to double check the Q&A, see that I haven't missed anything. Oh golly,
question here, which it doesn't necessarily here it's applying to a family member, but it could be a friend. How do you help a family member that doesn't want to be helped?
Yeah, it's really tricky, isn't it? So the thing is, we have to respect people's boundaries, and the age-old, you can't you can't drag a horse to water or something along those lines, but you can be kind, and you can do the things that you think will be as healthy for them as possible. So it may be that you know that what they're doing is sitting in their room, and what you have a notion that probably isn't the most healthy thing for them. So you could come up with some distraction techniques, things that you think that they would actually make it worthwhile them coming out of their room for. So that's just an example, but actually you can't force it, but you can help to create a helpful environment.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say is that if they've spoken to you about the anxiety, even the fact that they've talked to you about it is helping. Yeah. It might be that they're not ready to access kind of somebody else's help or a professional's help, but actually the fact they've identified something's not right and they're speaking to you could be a really good starting point for them. And it might be that as you listen to them, they then become more open to the idea of being helped. So don't give up if you're at that very early stage.
Yeah. And we touched a bit up on bullying last time. Somebody was worried about, felt that their anxiety was being caused by bullies. And I just wanted to come back to that really, because I think it is an issue that a lot of people find that they struggle with, or kind of come, I think, to be honest, a lot of people would say at some stage of their life that they have encountered that. And we're talking tonight about thinking and thinking traps. Now, one of the things, sort of, if you like, the sucker punch about bullying is that often it's not even, they're not even there, and we're still feeling anxious, scared, or affected. And in a way, what we're doing is giving that other person the power over how we feel, even when they're not there. So we need to take that power back, because that's not their power to have. So one of the ways we can do that is write down what they actually do or say. Write down what they actually do or say. And not only just is that helpful, because actually if you when it is right for you to talk to somebody, then you've got a list and you've got some facts and dates, which is really helpful. But it also helps for you to notice the days when they are not doing or saying something. Because so often we fill in the gaps, don't we? We talked about that. We fill in the gaps and we assume. So it might be that that we're being bullied by somebody, but we're kind of reading into other people by their behaviour. We're kind of assuming that they're on their side, where they may well not be. So write down what you actually are facing in terms of what they say and what they do, and that will help you because you're looking at facts, and you can then share those facts with other people, but also it can help you to spot the days when they're not there, and you can celebrate that and build on that. Is it fact or is it opinion? Let's stick to the facts. That might help. Right, we're running out of time, and I'm just going to have a quick look. Could you make suggestions? I'm not sure, but I think you may be feeling that X is that. Right, I'm not sure I understand. I'm sorry, there was somebody said, could I make suggestions? I'm not sure, but I think you may be feeling that something is that right. Oh, I see. That's your... Yeah, you could make suggestions. I think we're going back to the friend or the family member that didn't want to be helped. You could make suggestions. Yeah, and see how that goes. If that's your instinct, there's no right or wrong with helping friends and family, is it? It's feeling our way sensitively, respecting the boundaries, but being as helpful and useful as we can. And the last question was, why do other people make me feel anxious? Oh my goodness, if I could answer that question. Yeah, that is a really big question, isn't it? And I'm not sure that I know the answer to that one, if I'm honest. Because other people matter to us, don't they? But we have to be careful that we are basing those feelings of anxiety on what is factual, and not just reading into it and kind of blowing things, catastrophizing, and all the other things that we've been talking about tonight. So let's keep it on the facts and not opinions, and let's not fill in gaps. Okay, we are coming into land. It's nearly time for us to finish. So what we do in the Haven is a Christian project. Both Jazz and I are Christians, and we are inspired by our faith to run the Haven. We want to see other people kind of freed from anxiety, really. We don't think that that's something that it should be defining or restricting our lives. But we also believe that there's a great thing to be said about meditation and prayer. And if you are the praying type, then you will like this, the way that we end. And if you're not the praying type, then just take this as an opportunity to be still and calm and meditative, because that is a very good thing indeed. So we're going to, I'm going to share the screen again. So
slightly under pressure tonight. Claire, sorry, but you've zoned out. I think it's glitched for a few moments. So okay. I thought I'd jump in at this point just in case you didn't come back. But I'm just going to lead us in this prayer, and do make it your own if you'd like to. So let's just take a moment to be calm, and to take a deep breath. And let's follow these words which are on the screen. So, loving God, please grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. In the days and the weeks and the months ahead, grant me the gift of peace, real peace, in the depth of my being, a peace that goes beyond my understanding, and help me to find ways to build a lasting calm into my life. Amen.
Amen. Right. There we go. Brilliant. Guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. And all the top tips you shared. It's been great to give your feedback through to other people as well, and some really great questions. Yeah, keep them coming. So we will be back next week, same time, for the third and the final part of this webinar series. And we are going to be looking at all things to do with sleep. It's one of the things that when we talk to people in the Haven, both our support groups and the courses we run in schools, it's one of the things that people seem to struggle with the most. So we're going to be looking at sleep and what difference we can make in helping ourselves to get better sleep, because that definitely, almost without doubt, will make a big difference to our anxiety levels. Jez, thank you, my friend. Thank you for joining us tonight. Have you? Oh no, I thought you'd frozen there for a minute, but you're just being very still. That makes me nervous.
Well, thank you again for joining us. Don't forget to check out the YouTube channel, and we look forward to spending some time with you next Wednesday again.
Yeah, so, and again, if you are the thing that I said about the thinking traps, if you want to look into more of those, I will put a link to that underneath the YouTube when we put this up in a couple of days. And we'll also put a link to a really good website that'll help you if you think that audio hallucinations or hearing voices is something that you're affected by. Great. Thanks, guys. Take care. God bless. See you soon.